Hello, you've tuned into another special Himal South Asian conversation. Today we'll be talking about the important election coming up in Nepal. If you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, then do follow the Himal South Asian podcast channel where we bring you important, crucial conversations on issues from across South Asia. You can also log into our website, himalmag.com. Over the coming week, we will bring you more reportage, more analysis, and interviews about the Nepal election. And as always, support our work by becoming a paying Himal patron. You'll find a link to our patron program in the episode notes. Now, why is this such a pivotal election in Nepal? You will all remember that in September last year, there was a Gen Z protest. Youth took to the streets of Kathmandu. There had been simmering discontent about the state of the economy, about the lack of jobs, and about political corruption and nepotism across the country. So, when the Oli government and the police came down very high handedly on the protesters, the protest turned into a mass anger, there was violent resistance, and it ultimately became a revolution that toppled the government. So there were then a couple of days of uncertainty where people in Nepal worried about a return to monarchy, about a military coup. But then an interim government was installed. And on March 5th, Nepal will hold elections to its House of Representatives. This is the lower house of a bicameral parliament. And that lower house was dismantled after the Gen Z protests in September last year. Now, Nepal is no stranger to revolution and new political dawns, but none of these movements or new beginnings have actually brought political stability, long term political stability, to the country. So, how much of that is set to change with this election? Who are the major players? How are voters, especially Gen Z voters, going to decide the contours of the next government? Joining me today to discuss all of this are Pranaya Rana, a journalist and editor who writes the Kalam Weekly newsletter, Anjali Sah, a law student and intersectional feminist, who was part of the Gen Z movement and who also writes about issues relating to the Madhes region where she is from, and Roman Gautam, the editor in chief of Himal South Asian. Thank you all for being here today. Roman, I'm going to come to you first, as usual, to set the stage. You were in Kathmandu when the Gen Z protest happened in September. You've been closely watching all the political developments over the last 6 months. Uh, what what has this time been between the protests and this election? What's it been like under the interim government, and what really is the mood in Nepal going into this election?
Yeah, good question. And I think that even trying to get a read on the mood, I think, is already an intensely subjective thing. I think so. I should qualify that this is kind of how it all looks to me. I think that looking back to that week, with the protests and the government falling soon afterwards, it felt like there are moments in a country's life, I think, when all of its history just kind of gets compressed into one small, super intense, pressured moment. And it felt very much like that, right? I think that there was so much at stake. But I mean, of course, there was the violence and we were all reeling from that. But then you had all of these questions suddenly that came to the fore. What is happening in terms of corruption, in terms of governance, in terms of just basic responsibility in running the country, but also bigger questions, right? What is going to happen with federalism, which there was a massive movement in the Madhes. You could say that even the civil war, it took that to win a basic promise of federalism. What was going to happen with the monarchy? Because, like you said, there were these questions of, is the king going to come back? So I just remember that moment and all of Nepali history seemingly just bearing down on us in that 1 week. And I think that a lot of us were looking ahead at the election that we knew had to come with a lot of trepidation. I think that there was also, there were questions of whether the old parties would even stand for the election, especially KPOLI and the UML. They had been making a lot of noise about basically boycotting or ignoring and trying to delegitimize the election. So I think that, especially after that very violent week and the kind of intensity of it, I think that in my mind at least, there was a worry of what would this election feel like. And I think, how much of a threat of violence and of unrest would there be. I think I'm glad to report that that hasn't come to pass. And I think that that's a very good thing. We've looked at, Sri Lanka had its own revolt, Bangladesh had its own revolt. Many people have drawn comparisons between there and here. I think the best thing we can say about all three places is that those revolts are going to end in largely peaceful and wholly legitimate democratic elections in each place. And I'm glad to say that in Nepal as well, right? I think a lot of the frustration that drove the Gen Z protests is still there. And I think that that's what's driving a big wave, I think, of support for the newer political forces, especially the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, the RSP, the new kid on the block, so to speak. So I think we're just gearing up to vote, and I think that election fever is building up, which is all as it should be. So I think that's really the mood on the ground here, at least for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'd like to remind our listeners, if you want to go back and kind of, for all that context of what happened during the protests, do go to the himalmag.com website. You'll find pieces by Pranay and by Roman. Pranay, you wrote about how the KPOL government was really responsible for those deaths that happened during the protests. Roman, you wrote about, what this was really against that the failed political class, the entire political class had just let down the people of Nepal. But Anjali, if I can just, just the same question to you about the mood going into this election now. During the Gen Z protests, the youth had made very clear that they were tired of, political corruption, the elitism. There were those videos going around about nepo babies, right? The people from the families of these of from political families who were flaunting their kind of lavish lifestyles and wealth, and people were sick and tired of that. Are Gen Z voters, do you think they're going to come out in large numbers during this election? Is that spirit of both the anger and the hope of September, is that still there now?
Gen Z protest has not been ended. We are still protesting in our own mind, in our own space, and in our own dialogues, in our own classes, in our own community. The protest, and I think the protest mindset has not yet gone. We are still protesting, and we are still anxious. What is going to happen? Yes, we are less anxious compared to the September 8 and 9, and during that space we were more anxious about what's going to happen, who is going coming forward and who is going backward. But right now we are happening, what if the violence happen, what if the same thing repeats, what if our vote will won't count, what if there would be some kind of mischievous activities on the polling centers. So such kinds of anxiousness is still with us and is still within the communities. And also, when I was last week when I was in Madhes, and I saw how the political whim of women, because the women voters are highest in Madhes. I do not know the data, but looking at the observation, because most of the people are in foreign employment, so women voters are there and they are active on political things as well. And there is a different whim that regional parties are struggling, and so many things is happening on the backside of this election thing, that Kathmandu beg to differ with those activities and only see things from a different perspective, which is also from the epitome of the philosophy of the election of the democracy. That might be true, but on the ground realities things are different. So the Gen Z people who also want to see things from the Kathmandu. I think the situation is very peaceful, but those Gen Z people who want to see things from mother's perspective, who want to see things from the Humla perspective, South far western perspective, far western regional perspective, from the Mukulumba perspective, then, and also talking about the candidacy which youth people most we see in RSP are not the uh, I'm not talking about legacy politics, but do you know, when we have the communication before the political protest, before the Gen Z protest, there were some kind of soft alignment with this philosophy or that party that has gone at this time. Either they are extreme of their party or they are nothing. So that is a very dangerous thing that's happening right now. The extremism in the political alignment and the political my political party can only fix this country, that motto is going to harm us in various way, and the caucus that used to happen among the communities has been breaking right now. So even among the Gen Zs, ourselves, there is some kind of tensions, because we all have this mindset that our parties are going to fix this country, which is not going to happen in this, at least in this parliamentary form of governance which we have according to our constitution. One party cannot fix the nation, and that is the constitutional reality which has been overshadowed by the whole Nepali, not only the Gen Z, the whole Nepali, especially the elite philosopher, the elite people of Kathmandu often see things uh, from a very good way and very positive way, which is different in the ground reality, which I want to say. And those candidates who just entered RSP, are some of them did not get ticket from their party, that's why they are in RSP. So that thing is also there, and if they won, that might flip the situation in the parliament, because they already have a soft corner and the alignment with different party, and they have gotten ticket from the different parties, so those things might play role after the election if they won. So such things are also there. So we haven't forgotten what happened on September, and we are never going to forget it. And also the actions which are happening, the political whim and the election whim has overburdened us rather than simplifying the situation, I would say.
Anjali, thank you for that. And since you were also talking about September, right? And I mean, right after those protests, you were also a guest on one of our podcasts and wanted to kind of point viewers to that. I think that it was you plus three other, or sorry, two other activists also who were involved in the Gen Z movement. And I think that was a very good snapshot of the expectations, hopes, dreams, frustrations, everything that kind of propelled the movement at that moment, right? Just to briefly add to what you were saying, if I could ask you, looking back even at that conversation that you had when you came onto our podcasts, but also just that moment and kind of the expectations specifically of the interim government, how has kind of from, and I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the movement, certainly, this is your view on it, but I think you do have a very informed view. How has for the movement the performance of the interim government in these months felt like?
Definitely, I'm not talking on the behalf of whole Gen Z, especially who are advocating for Gen Z Council, who are advocating for this document which we got signed and everything. But from my personal perspective, I would say that I did not have much hope with the interim government, which I also I think said in the last podcast. I just wanted someone to keep this transition period in cool way, and I think I have gotten that, but not in a good way as well, because it won't be wrong if I say the current government, the citizen government, is a bureaucratic government, because every one of them has the bureaucratic background. So how I see Nepal as having three layers of citizens, not exactly layers, but the three major identities, which is the Khasare identities, indigenous identities, and Madhesi identities. So from that perspective, the bureaucracy has always been dominated by the hilly upper class Khasare people. So that is reflected in the interim government. So even when we're talking about let's have a social inclusion, the women government, since we have the women prime minister, we all were advocating, even I was personally advocating for this and that, and there were the things. But again, when we look at the interim government, that is not socially inclusive. That from the aesthetic inclusion sense, from the women perspective, yes, we have done much great than the past, but again, from the social inclusion perspective, it is not. And talking about the actions of them, they're definitely trying, I do not want to dismiss them, but again, the flood that happened quickly after the protest, and so many roads were blocked, so many roads were swept away. And even I know, I was living in an island, living in a Madhes felt like living in an island, because three roads were broken from the connectivity of my village to the Southern Mukam, the headquarter, the connectivity with other villages, to other people were broken. Our walls were broken. Our so many things were broken. And our paddies, our sugarcane were like lost, swept away. And yet the government I did not see the much more activeness. Even when the army came, when the IPF came in our village, they were not willing to construct the road or like at least help. And then there were community, the Dalit community, the other community of our own of our own village. They built the bamboo road themselves. And once the road started moving, and after the next day only, the army started working on that road. So the trust on this interim government is of course not 100%, but I just don't want to blame them because they do not have the experience to work on everything. They are just so the bureaucratic mindset has always been the command chain. uh, of course the command chain is different in the army and the bureaucracy, but again the command chain which is in the bureaucracy uh, felt like a why are we talking about democracy, federalism, the government, the politics is different from bureaucracy that I felt from this government. And I'm like, no, education cannot fix this country.
Pranay, I wanted to also jump across to you and um, but I've been in touch with a couple of foreign correspondents who are coming in to cover the election. I think a lot of the attention of the world is now turning towards Nepal, and a lot of them seem to, perhaps understandably, have kind of fixated on this contest in Zappa 5. Where the old prime minister, Oli, KP Sarma Oli, is going up against the RSP's Balincha, former mayor of Kathmandu, recently resigned to fight the election, really being projected as the new face of a new Nepal and this new party, the RSP, which has promised to make him prime minister if they win the election. So there is this narrative of the clash of the old versus the new, and I think a lot of the international attention is focusing there. But I also feel like the bigger picture, I think, right now really is that the clash that is really now setting up is more or less between the RSP and one of the older parties, the Congress, which is now under new leadership in Gogon Thapa. So, Pranay, I wanted to ask you, maybe to kind of, as a journalist and somebody who covers Nepal closely, how that's looking to you in terms of the contest. Is it a Oli versus Balin thing? Is it an RSP versus Congress thing? What are the main contenders when you look at it from that national perspective?
The primary contest, really, yes. I mean, Zappa naturally is going to be the center of attention because that's where the former Prime Minister KP Oli, that's his home ground, his bastion. He has always won from that area. And Balen Shah, the upstart new candidate, the former mayor of Kathmandu, who has kind of become the face of the RSP, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, for now, has chosen to go to Japa and challenge Oli on his home ground, to, I guess, send a message that him defeating Oli would effectively, at least symbolically, um, mark an end of the old guard, and maybe usher in a new kind of political leadership. So it is an important battleground, because it is going to decide whether voters pick a new path or go back to the older guard. That's why I think it's important. It is also going to mark kind of a political. Uh, I wouldn't say the end of a political career, but at least a political pause for quite some time for either of these two candidates. If Oli wins, then Balen, who has staked his entire candidacy in Japa, is going to have to take a break for the next 5 years. And a loss for Oli would also mean that he's no longer in parliament. His party, the UML, he's kind of fashioned the entire party around his own image. So the party is going to take a severe kind of beating if Oli loses. So that's important, personality wise and symbolically. But really, electorally, yes, the contest is increasingly looking like it's between the RSP and the Congress. Although I'm not so sure how much of a fight the Congress can put up, because from from what I hear from conversations across the country, there is a significant RSP wave. Most voters, especially younger voters, are definitely looking for alternatives or new parties, new candidates to vote for. Uh, Many are rejecting old familial patterns of voting, where their parents would vote for the Congress or their the UML, so they would vote for the Congress or the UML. That's breaking apart a bit. I wouldn't say it's completely gone, but that seems to be what's happening. But again, this is I need to give a caveat here, because in Nepal we don't really have polls. We don't really know how to assess the mood, except to just talk to people and listen to what they say. But most much of our votes are they come from, we're emotional voters. They come from the gut. We don't really most of Nepalis don't really tend to study policy documents or look at the manifestos. You just feel like, I like this guy, or I like this party feels like it's going to do something different, so I'm going to vote for them. So generally, that's how I think undecided voters at least tend to vote. So can't really tell which way the contest will go until we actually end up at the ballot box. But it does, from preliminary conversations, it does seem like there is a contest between the newly reformed Congress under Gagan Thapa and the resurgent RSP, which already had a significant presence in the last election, but this time looks to be much stronger with the addition of Palin Shah. His popularity is palpable across the country, really, not just in Kathmandu or not just in Zappa even.
Yeah, and Pranay, you've more or less covered. I mean, the change of leadership in the Congress, and just to fill people in, basically, there was a tussle over the leadership between the old guard and the new guard, I guess, in the Nepali Congress, which is, I guess you would call it the most centrist of the parties in the traditional Nepali political parties. So I think with the Congress, yes, there's been a refresh of sorts. Oli, like you were saying, continues to lead his party and continues to fight to save his seat in his bastion. I think that a lot of people probably see Oli more as a liability than an asset to his party at this point, given how unpopular he has become, since he was the person in charge when the protests and the killings and then everything else that followed happened. There's also, of course, the Maoists. I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. I think they don't seem to be a huge player. And Pranay, Anjali, correct me if I'm wrong, if things are looking different to you. But Pranay, you were talking about how Nepalis, we tend to vote very emotionally. It's not like a rational calculation based on policy documents. My mind goes back to the first election after the Civil War, when you had the Maoists laying down arms, joining electoral politics, standing, fighting an election for the first time. And I think my take, at least, is that driven by a lot of familiar frustrations, right? I think that a lot of the frustrations that drove the Gen Z movement were shared by generations prior as well: bad governance, corruption, etc., and just being sick and tired of the old elite, both in terms of governance, in terms of inclusion. And I remember back then, I think, a lot of the predictions were that the Maoists maybe would be competitive, but they ended up sweeping the polls. And I think there was a moment there where Nepalis were expressing, even if they were not all completely convinced by the Maoists, they were expressing a deep-seated frustration with the powers that be and the system that was already in place, right? I mean, I'm tempted to see parallels in some ways between that moment and now, in terms of the kind of conversation, the kind of vibe that's building up around the RSP. And I agree that there seems to be a rising wave in their favor. So just throwing that out to maybe Pranay to start with, to you, but then also to Anjali. Anjali, I know that you would, I think, have been quite young as well. I don't know if you voted in that election. I think, Pranay, you probably would have. But just throwing that out to you guys to just reflect on how that plays today.
No, yeah, I definitely see parallels there. The same kind of sentiment that drove, so much of Nepal to vote for the Maoists at that time. We're seeing a similar kind of wave right now, where people are saying that let's give them a chance. That's what the overwhelming sentiment during in 2008 was, that these Maoists, they fought a 10-year war for their ideals, for their beliefs, and they've joined mainstream politics. Let's see what they're gonna do. So let's give them a chance. Even right now, a few conversations with people in Zappa, what I hear is that, and these were, they were traditionally UML voters. They've always voted UML. But what they are also saying is that let's give these RSP guys a chance. And if they don't perform, then we'll go back to our old parties in the next election. So that kind of seems to be the sentiment right now. These that at least let's see what they can do, which is what
Mhm.
happened in 2008. And then, if you remember, the first Constituent Assembly, didn't perform very well. The Maoists were kind of disappointing. And in the second Constituent Assembly election, the Maoists were again reduced to third place. The Congress won, the most number of seats in the second Constituent Assembly. So voters did go back to their traditional parties when they saw that the new party did not perform according to their expectations. So that also could happen if the RSP is not able to deliver on the kind of promises that it has made, or even perception wise, if young voters, if Gen Z, the people who now have these grand expectations from the RSP, if they feel like the RSP is not delivering, or it cannot, or it's going the same way as the other parties, they're going to go back to the Congress or the UML or the Maoists, or who they've traditionally been voting for. That's really how I see it. Anjali, over to you, please. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, Anjali, if I can just jump in here, right? Maybe to also add a little bit more of a dimension to the question for you. I mean, of course, I don't want to, push you to reflect on 2008 when I don't think you were even voting at that point. I think that the Madhes, and just a bit of background for everybody listening. I mean, the Madhes, the most populous but also the most marginalized part of Nepal. So really a key battleground, and I think that both Gagan Thapa, the new head of the Congress, he's contesting a seat from the Madhes, and Zappa 5, this battle that we were just talking about between Balensha and Kepioli, also happening in the Madhes. So in many ways, I think a very key kind of center of everything that's happening. I wanted to ask you, because you do have a much closer read on the pulse, I think, of what's happening in the Madhes than I do, certainly. Um, is there also this wave in favor of the RSP happening there? And also, what is happening with the Madhes parties? Because, of course, there is a long political tradition of activism, and the formation of political parties that were predicated primarily on representing the interests and the identity of the Madhes. What's happening in terms of those parties? Because strangely, they seem to be a much smaller part of the conversation, at least than I expected in this election.
So, not just at this election, but if we see the pattern of the prime minister candidates, even in the past, or even in 2008, or before that, or even if I have to quote the book, Frederick Gay's book, which is the Regionalism and National Unity in Nepal, the book clearly stated how the Madhes vote has always been manipulated by the hilly elites, and they captured the booth, they captured the election, they captured the sovereignty of Madhes, and uses it for themselves rather than for the Madhes. So I certainly do not have any hopes from the hilly elites people who have come to the Madhes for the votes, not for the voters. I quote that they are there for the votes, not for the voters. And even if they go in the parliament, not just talking about Gagan Thapa or Kipioli, because for me, Madhes is not just 8 districts, but the whole 24 district is Madhes. For me, so from the whole 24 districts, whoever are there, if they have lived there, if they have experienced the pain, if they have the philosophical clarity, then things can different, because being a Madhesi and being born in Madhes is different thing. So At least I believe in that way. So if those candidates who have greater linkage for the social justice, greater philosophical clarity on things, then it might be different. Otherwise they're just for the voters, including Gagan Thapa and KPOli and Naran Kajisrashta and so many names. I have to google and tell you. But again, talking about regional parties, when we talk about this so so regional parties, their situation is of course dire, and it is because the caste vote. So if you understand the caste vote, that plays the majority role, because I belong to Sarlahi constituency too, where the major two candidates are have always been from the three election, this election, previous, and the previous election of that, Rajendra Mahto and Mahendra. These two have been the greatest rival during the election. But again, if those two people were not being in the activity of politics and activism, I would not be here in this podcast. So I have respect for them more. But again, every time one candidates win because of the caste vote. So that thing plays majority role, and not only in Sarlahi constituency too, but from the whole 24 districts, the caste vote plays a role rather than the sentiment vote, and that has been reflected in the federal election as well. Because last federal election, the UML, which certainly pushed themselves as an anti-federalist, even during the Madhes movement, they were their party leaders has a much brutal comments on Madhes movement, and yet the UML had the majority because of the caste vote. So again, talking about regional parties which does not seem have a great vim on the national newspaper, but on the ground, of course, they still have the capture of the caste vote. And until and unless the hierarchy of the caste demolishes the hierarchy of this layer of citizens of hilly elites, Madhesi and indigenous, has been quashed, they would of course be in the cabinet, in the parliament, and I would love to see them. Because for example, I have always seen this Dhaka topi government being pissed by by the candidates of people who does not originally belongs to that so-called Dhaka topi. So to see their face pissed off, I would love to see them on the uh, parliament.
Sure. We've been talking about old guard versus new guard in terms of KPOli versus Balansha versus Gagan Thapa, but just looking beyond that, one of the demands in September and the days following the protest was to look for a kind of generational shift in Nepal's politics, right? So younger people can have a say. Some parties like the RSP seem to have brought younger people in, fielded younger candidates. But mostly, is it still older people? Is it still the old guard contesting? Anjali, if you can go first, and then Pranay. And of course, Anjali, when you came on the podcast in September and even now, you've made it very clear that even among the younger, that Gen Z is not homogenous, right? But just in terms of that young voice, is that being represented in these elections?
Yes, I think in every constituency there are younger people who are contesting, and most of them from the RSP. But I said it again. Some of them already has the political alignment, but they did not get the ticket, and that's why they are in RSP. That is clearly seen among some of the candidates. So until and unless the political parties have democratization of ticket distributing, this was easily to happen. And the voters, I think, uh, there is, again, if the caste vote does not works over the emotion vote, then the things would be different. So it's Pranay that I said, like, how we are so emotional that rational during the votes. That is definitely with the Gen Z people as well. And the youth candidates, we feel like they represent us, and we are likely to vote them. But again, there are some youth candidates who are literally using Hindutva as their major theme, and they are only asking vote from the Hindu people. So we can see those going from the youth voters as with youth voters as well as youth candidates. So if the situation favors them, they can of course get in the parliament. But again, things are not as it seems to be, I would say that.
And what about women candidates? Pranay, I know you've been looking into this a little bit, and the number of women candidates contesting is still very low. Some we might even call it abysmal. Do you know roughly what percentage of candidates are women in all all the major parties, including this new party, the RSP? What's going
Yeah,
on there?
10%. Yeah, it is quite
10%.
abysmal. So across the board, we have what 394 or 95 women candidates out of over 3,000. So across the board is 10%. I think the RSP is the best at like around 13 or 14% of all candidates, and that is quite abysmal when considering the fact that 50% of voters are women. And now these 50% of the electorate is going to have to vote for men because they don't really have women candidates in their constituencies. Even when they do have women candidates, so many of the parties have set it up in certain ways that the women candidates are bound to fail. They've been given constituencies where there are already very, very strong male candidates. So it's kind of almost like a sacrificial candidacy. So despite all of this talk about inclusion and representing everyone, the parties really have let women down this election, like really terribly, because 10% is shameful.
Yeah, it is shameful. Anjali, what do you think? Why have women candidates gone missing again in this election?
It's the same, like I told you, like the hierarchy is so deep rooted in this country. We cannot even uh imagine to live in an ideal world. Yes, we can talk to live in a how it feels to live in an ideal world, but when it comes to the reality, it's very deeply rooted with the hierarchy. So that plays role in the party system as well. Even in student politics, when we see, even there we can see the hierarchy of caste, hierarchy of class, the hierarchy of gender there. So it's not even the thing, things are new in the federal election. And also talking about the last election where the 10% candidates were women and 4.5% of them won the election. And one of my Facebook friend, I would not call the friend, but Facebook friend quoted that only 4.5% won the election. And I was like, 10% of them got the candidacy and 4.5% won. It means 51% got the won the election. That's how you should analyze. But my Facebook friend quoted that only 4.5% were elected from the last election. That's why this year he did not analyze, but it portrayed that that's why this year also we got only 11% of candidacy.
They're not seen as winnable. I mean, so many women
Yes,
candidates
yes,
across South
yes.
Asian countries.
Yes, that's one thing. And the other thing is the proportional representation, which says 33%. So our minds are bound how to build the 33% rather than, oh, women are the capable for the election. We are just there, okay, 33% we will be doing from the PR list. That's all. So that's the clear mindset of the elections and of the political parties, that we have to build the 33% and we will be building from the PR election. So that mindset also plays a pivotal role while not giving the candidacy to the women candidate. And also the economy plays the again the huge role across the South Asia, how women have less access to their own property, despite our constitutional says equal lineage right to women. So the constitution is definitely a rule book for women rather than a constitution.
Okay, as the only non-Nepali in this conversation, Roman, I'm going to ask you to just quickly explain, what that PR list and the direct representation is. So over to you.
it gets a little bit complicated, but basically there is a provision that based on the share of the vote that every party receives, there's a system that then fills out other seats, reserved seats for proportional representation in the parliament, to achieve a much better mix of representation. And that's not just on gender, that's also on religious and caste backgrounds, which is, I think, one of the more, or perhaps the most progressive gain of the post-war constitution for us. And Anjali, I'm just, from what you were saying, my mind goes back to a piece that we published on the very recent election in Bangladesh, where also we were, the writer who published with us was looking at this question of women's representation, and also there seems to be this understanding that because there are other kind of quota provisions that are already done, that are already in place for women, that almost excuses you as a party from having to put forward a significant number of women in the direct electoral races. It's sad to say that I think that there's some of that thinking also now in Nepal, right? And I think a lot of interesting parallels here, I think, in terms of how these things work across South Asia. I mean, I'm also thinking about the ways that caste politics works right across the border between Nepal and India, right? And I think that a lot of the dynamics in the Madhes and Madhesi electoral patterns are mirroring some of those trends. But anyway, we won't go into all of that. I do want to come back to the Madhes, though, and I think that. Of course, we've talked a fair bit about it, but really, I think the question of federalism, right? I think again, this was I think 2 or 3 years ago already. I think we were looking at Nepali politics where people were talking about post-ideological politics, right? Because it was so difficult to actually distinguish between the parties on what they actually believed and stood for. All of them were pretty much too similar, right? But federalism seemed to be the main ideological cleavage. For some background, Nepal was a unitary kingdom. It's only after the Civil War, and then a constitution, the new constitution. And I think very important to say that for the new constitution to include provisions for federalism, it took a big movement in the Madhes, which I think, in terms of the grand sweep of things in Nepali history, was almost as significant as the Gen Z movement, or I would say as significant as the Gen Z movement in terms of winning some progressive provisions in this new constitution. So, I think that federalism, that's all to say that federalism, I think, has had a struggle arriving in Nepali politics. I think that a lot of the old parties and powers, especially outside the Madhes, Anza, you were talking about the Khasaria and the hill elites. I think that it's fair to say that they were always quite strongly opposed to federalism, and it's really indigenous groups and Madhesi voters who have demanded that federalism become a big part of Nepal. Even in recent times, the RSP, earlier in its very young career, was making a lot of noise about kind of going back to the drawing board, asking whether federalism is necessary. There have been debates in the country about whether it's economically efficient, whether there's duplication of responsibility from the national government and the federal governments. For me, what's been quite interesting in this election is that as the RSP has gone to the Madhes, and tried to also connect to voters there, one of the things that they have quite significantly changed their position on is federalism. I think that now, pretty much across the board, except for the royalist parties, the parties that want to return to a unitary Hindu kingdom, even a lot of the traditional parties that were certainly not enthusiastic about federalism have now put that forward in their manifestos as well, to say that, yes, federalism is here to stay. There are some differences in terms of how to implement it. But Anjali, I wanted to ask you to reflect on that, right? I mean, can we read what's happening now as kind of the final step in the entrenchment and the institutionalization of federalism in Nepal? It seems like any party like the RSP that starts out, let's say, in Kathmandu, among the Kathmandu voters, it can talk trash about federalism and get away with it. But as soon as you try to build a party that has a broader base and a national appeal, it's starting to feel like federalism is now a non-negotiable. You can negotiate the details of how it is implemented, but as a principle, it now seems pretty much you don't mess with it. Is that a fair reading from how you're seeing things from the Madhes as well?
I want to answer it very radical way, but again, having this election code of conduct, I would try to tone down as much as possible. So the things are like, so as a feminist, especially some of the radical feminists also always talk about performative male ego. So there is this performative federal ego with the parties to gain the voters, to gain the votes rather than to win the voters. So there is a significant differences to win the vote and win the voters. So even I was contesting in the student politics of my college, and I lost from 10 votes. But I remember winning the voters' heart. That will always drive me to talk about politics and talk about different things at my campus. So winning and losing is always a number game when it comes to election. So when we talk about federalism and the election and the protest, so Roman, thank you so much for saying that the Genji protest and Madhes protest has so much of similarity, Madhes movement. But again, the journalist, I have a huge complaint because when 52 or 54 people were killed during the Madhes movement, no newspaper had a front page news about that protest. So yeah, things are always different when things happen in Kathmandu and things happen beyond the Kathmandu. And that's the state hierarchy, and that's the state biasness with all people, be it the different diverse professional background, but all the professional background have such kind of biasness and favoritism towards the Kathmandu, and beyond the Kathmandu the situation are different. And talking about the parties were saying that we are there for federalism and this and that. The current example, what happened, for the national rebuilding project, our interim government announced for the uh, announced for the money donation. Yes, donation from the civil society, from this and from the people. And we heard that significantly no or less donation has been given, and there were a circular given by the this government to the provincial government and local level to freeze their 20% of their budget for the national rebuilding project, which Lumini province aligned with it, and the reprioritize on a budget is happening. And according to DRCN research result, I was part of the result sharing program, and then I heard that Madhya province denied it because it was not constitutional practice. It came from a circular rather than the constitutional ground. So the federal government, the local government, and the provincial government, they all are the governments. We only do not have a one government. We have 753 plus 7 plus 1 government in Nepal, and that is always been mismatched from the Kathmandu, and that has been shown by this interim government action as well. So to change those policy, we want the parliamentarians who have the knowledge and the belongingness to the federalism, and who can accept that Madhes movement happened for our good rather than the Madhes is good. So until and unless those things happen, those political parties who has the past of denying the federalism or hating the federalism are of course accepting federalism for the voters rather than for the votes rather than the voters. So until and unless there is a similarity between vote and voters, the things will always in the question.
Absolutely. And Pranay, I just wanted to bat that over to you as well. I think in the grand perspective of Nepali history and the twists and turns, does this look like a very significant moment to you when it comes to the question of federalism?
I don't know how significant it's going to be, uh, because I think the parties have all kind of realized that, look, federalism is not gonna go away. Uh, so in some form or the other, in their manifestos and in their speech, they're kind of reflecting that. But again, like Anjali said, it's a matter of how honest they are. Do they really believe in it, or are they just saying it because they're going to win votes? They've gone to the Madhes, and of course, they know that that federalism was a Madhesi demand. So it almost seems like they're paying lip service to federalism. Especially parties like the RSP. who have been very skeptical of federalism. In the last election, they did not field any candidates for the provincial assembly elections. So they have no representation at the provincial level, which is now damaging them. They've kind of shot themselves in the foot because the National Assembly, the elections, the March 5 elections are for the House of Representatives. The National Assembly is a permanent body which is always in place, and it is elected by partially by the provincial assemblies. Since they have no representation at the provincial assemblies, they can get no one in the National Assembly. So, their plans to develop or to change things and all are going to be stymied by the fact that they did reject federalism in the last election. So no matter what they do now, it's not going to be enough. They're going to be hamstrung by the National Assembly, which is now going to be dominated by the Congress, the UML, and the Maoists. Um, and this time, I'm surprised that even the UML has come around to saying that, yeah, we like federalism, we're going to improve its functioning and all. When the UML has been one of the parties that's been the most against handing any kind of power to the provinces. They've blocked so many laws that would make the functioning of federalism much more efficient. Every time you go to the provincial assemblies and you talk to provincial assembly members, what they always say is that our hands are tied. There is nothing we can do. The federal government has not given us, the legal right to enact so many of the provisions in the constitution, whereas the local level or the common people, they say, well, what are you doing? What are the provinces doing? How come you do nothing? And the provinces are forced to say, well, we can't do nothing because they don't let us do anything. So that has always been there, and that, I think, I mean, depending on who is coming to power, it's probably going to continue unless there is a strident demand from the provinces, and which is probably going to be the loudest voice is definitely going to come from Madhes province, um, because of this historical, the history of federalism being a Madhesi demand. Um, So I don't know how much if things are going to change. A lot of parties are focusing on the economics. They're talking about downsizing ministries, reducing the number of provincial assembly members, reducing the number of even federal parliamentarians. So there is a lot of fiscal conversations happening, but not a lot of political conversations around federalism. What does this actually mean, and why has it not functioned in the way that it was envisioned to? So that is a conversation I think that is missing right now. That I think will need to happen in the days to come after the election, even.
Yeah, since Pranaya raised this fiscal federalism, which is the weakest at right now. So until unless we figure out and fix the fiscal federalism, we have no moral value to judge the federalism from the economic perspective. Until and unless there's a fiscal federalism, until and unless the self confidence is there, they cannot even the local government who want the certain money over the budget from the fiscal commission, they have to take loan at 7%. So what kind of federalism are we practicing? It is envisioned in the way that citizen will speak against the federalism. So the moral value of the parliamentarians or the people who are advocating for non-federal country have no moral value because of this philosophical, this legal battles that is happening right now. So there's so many complexities within our own constitution that need to be amended. So instead of amending what can favor the federalism and develop the nation, because for the context, the flood that swept away the road, provincial government does not has the in the schedule 5 where the federal government has their duties, and the schedule 6 provincial, and the 8 the local government. The provincial government does not have the responsibility over the emergency situations, over the environment, over the climate, over the water things. The local government and the federal government only have it. So while I was posting about that, then a very philosophical person commented that what is for provincial government doing on that? Provincial government does not have jurisdiction to do anything over that, and that is stated in the constitution. So the things are uh, tangled in the way that people who feel like connected to the power would advocate against the federalism because of this system. So this system need to be amended. So that is just I wanted to add and focus on fiscal federalism.
I think that some of the things that just now both of you were raising are issues of the structure. I think structures of the state, of parliament, etc., rather than just problems of politics, right? In terms of parties and manifestos, etc. Pranay, you were talking about the upper house, right? And to give our audience a quick bit of context, basically when the government came down at the end of the Gen Z protests, for continuity, I think that the upper house remained undissolved. And that is not being contested right now, which means that the old parties remain entrenched there. So even if there were to be a case where the RSP were to sweep to power, they would be curtailed in any kind of reform agenda by the fact that they don't have anybody in the upper house. Now, over time, of course, the system is designed in a way that they will have a chance to also have fair representation there. But there's also, I think, other questions that come up here in terms of just the structures of Nepali politics. I think that I'll go out on a limb here. An educated guess that I think a lot of people are making right now is that the next government is going to be probably some combination between the RSP, the new party, and the Congress, which is perhaps the most refreshed of the old parties. I think we can say. And the reason for that is that I think, given the first past the post system, the very large number of parties that contest Nepali politics, it's very unlikely for one party to be able to form a government on its own. And that is just a structural reality of Nepali politics. I think that the nervousness for a lot of people is that we go back to a system that resembled the system before the Gen Z protests, where you had three parties all with a substantial share of the vote, none of them strong enough to form a government on their own, making these power sharing deals where somebody promises somebody, I'll be PM for 2 years, then I will gratefully and graciously hand it over to you, and then you can be PM. But none of that ever happened. And so we were locked in this scenario where you just had three ish parties. I mean, maybe now it'll be two, maybe it'll be three going forward. We'll have to wait and see for the vote to come through. But there is a very real danger that we go back to this kind of power sharing governments, all in coalition, all based on promises that no politician so far has been good at keeping. And that just means a lot of instability. It means governments changing sometimes every 6 months, sometimes every 2 years. Um, there have also, I think, through the Gen Z protests and since, been calls for reform of the electoral system to have direct elections for head of state, basically. So, wanted to kind of maybe as the closing question, hand that over to you guys, right? I mean, how much of what we are talking about now, of course, with the election, it's politics, but in terms of the problems and the frustrations, the frictions of Nepal today, how much of it is down to those structures?
Yeah, but again, talking about the problem, there are so many solutions that this structure has given us. Because when House of Representative, we were advocating for the dissolution of the party and dissolution of the parliament, and then in the history we have so many parliamentary resolutions. So our constitution has not envisioned, of course, for the transitional period, but our constitution slightly have envisioned that we will have the resolution of parliament in the future. So saying that this HOR, National Assembly, which is the upper house, which is the permanent house, where there is a lottery system. Some members get 6 years, some members get 4 years, some members get 2 years. So from that way, and the electoral colas uh, gives the vote from the local and from the provincial, and then that's how they are elected. So at this time when we are talking about the politics, we're talking about candidates, we are of course not talking about the structure. And I have always the person who like to talk about the structure and dismantling the structure that is not working, and that is being the hindrance of the federalism. So and so many other things as well, and also even the social inclusion, the women representation that is not happening in this first past the post election is because of that structure, which we previously discussed as well, even in this podcast. So the structure has been must be changed, and that's why the amendments on the constitution is the only way. And to do the amendment of the constitution, we need to have people who have the closeness to the this dead sea, to the to other things that need to be amended. But again, while we're talking about the freshness in Congress party, I do not see the freshness, because again, talking about the history of Congress, it has always been the same way. Power is snatched, power is not given in the Congress party history. Everybody has got the power by snatching from one to another. So that's their history, and Gen Z protests just helped them gaining the power earlier than maybe 5 to 6 years. So that's only happening. There is no freshness in Congress. At least I don't see it. And also, none of the parties, even the new, have the freshness. Every party is just talking about how we can have more votes and gain the power. And because of the structure, they do not, if they do not gain much power, they cannot be dictator. If every party, the ultimate aim is seems like to be a dictator rather than a democratic. So our constitutional structure also has envisioned that there is no dictatorship in our nation. So political instability, whenever it happens, of course it is a hindrance to the democracy, but again it is hindrance to the dictatorship as well. And I've always said that the difference between democracy and dictatorship is the consent, and the consent is given through the votes. So there must be right to recall, there must be right to reject, there must be none of the above. So such kind of structural change is very much required. And for a short period of time, we discussed about none of the above voters voting system, but again it was dismissed. But again, so many structural changes, talking about executive prime minister, I do not support that, because again that would be dictatorship. Given the social hierarchy that we have, that will turn into dictatorship. And of course, again, if the executive structure is within the one hand, that hand will never be the from the women, that will never be from the social inclusion perspective, from the other perspective. It won't happen. It will just re-institutionalize the feudal system that we have in our country. Not feudal system exactly, but feudalistic nature of the system. So structural changes and conversation is very much required. But I think the 10-year long, the constitutional assembly, not exactly 10 year, but the two constitutional assembly discussed so much about a structure, and those discussions are not in the public space. We do not know why there is two houses, why there is a bicameral system in the federal election, in the federal parliament. We do not know why there is a unicameral system in the province, why there is a local government with a permanent government, because there is no space for how the things are tied up among the local assembly and the local government.
Absolutely. Pranay, I think maybe to take us home, your reflections on that question.
Um, yeah, I mean, structures are always what make democracy, right? Like it's not the people, really. It is about, and elections really will, elections rotate out faces, personalities, individuals, but they don't necessarily revitalize institutions and structures that have been in place for a long time now. For instance, one of the most ossified and conservative structures that we have in place is the civil service, the bureaucracy. Um, and that has not seen any changes in a very, very long time. And these elections are not going to automatically renew the civil service and inject new energy into this bureaucracy. That is going to take some real political will. Um, and I don't know if any of the parties have that even within their agendas. I know, well, one party actually I think does explicitly talk about um, reforming the bureaucracy. The other parties not so much. So I mean, at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to turn this political will, this kind of political energy that is there today, into some lasting change. And that can only happen when we reform the institutions and structures that we have in place. It's not about getting rid of them, it's about making them function better. So, federalism is a structure. And federalism, you can't just talk about dismantling it when it's just been 10 years since that we've had it in place. Very short time. We need to talk about how to make it function better, how to allow it to function, because right now it hasn't even been allowed. So these are the kind of conversations that will need to happen, and these are very difficult, complex questions that can't be answered by just one speech. A charismatic politician cannot just go in front of a crowd and make a speech and then then resolve everything. These are long, difficult policy questions that need to happen on a national scale, uh, which I don't know if most people are interested in that, because it's not sexy. It's very it's a very, very complicated, deep question that you have to, like, there are numbers involved, there are lots of figures involved, there's so much complexity there, and our system, like our constitution, has envisioned federalism and the structures that we have in a very, very technical and complex manner. Like uh, even the way that the PR votes are allocated, that is so complex. But we don't want to talk about that because it's difficult. But that's what we need to do. Um, Things are not going to change on in April. Once the results are out, once the new parliament um, is in session, things are not going to automatically get better. And I think that's going to disappoint a lot of people. If people are going to expect rapid changes, they're going to expect things are going to now get better. But that's not how democracy works. Democracy is messy. It's slow. You can't just bulldoze your way um, through the constitution or through checks and balances. Maybe as a chief executive of a city, you could do that. But as the prime minister of a federal country, there is no way that you can just push through everything. It's about consensus, it's about coalition building, it's about talking to people and convincing them that you are right. It's not about telling people my way or the highway. That's not going to work. So these are the things that we will need to watch for, and these are allowances that we also will need to make. Whoever comes into power will need to acknowledge this, and we, the electorate, will also have to kind of be a little patient and be, watchful. Make sure that these people who are in parliament now realize the gravity of the situation, the responsibility that they have on their shoulders. And they shouldn't be looking for quick and easy fixes. They should be looking for long-term, um, as permanent as can be, solutions to these deep-rooted structural problems that Nepal has. So yeah, that there's no easy fix here. It's a long
Yeah.
and arduous road ahead.
Yeah, and I think that that's the grand democratic mess, and thank God that it is democratic after many, many decades of non-democratic rule in Nepal. Hopefully, democracy at least is here to stay with all of the messes, the pluses, minuses. Well, not minuses, but rather the complications that come with it. So yeah, let's go and vote. I think Nayantara, of course, not you. Anjali, me,
Okay.
and Pranay will all be voting, like so many millions of other Nepalis. And I think that Pranay put it very succinctly in terms of the mess that awaits us on the other side. Pranay, Anjali, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rohan.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Pranay
Nantara.
and
Thank you,
Anjali.
Anjali.
Thank you. And Roman, you and I will be back with more Himal conversations. I just want to remind our viewers and listeners that we will be looking closely at Nepal in the coming week. The election is on March 5th. So you can find a lot more reportage, interviews, analysis, all on the himalmag.com website. And as always, we're a small team doing the hard work of covering elections across South Asia. So please do become a paying Himal patron and support us in this journey. Once more, Pranay, Anjali, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching and or listening to this special Himal conversation.